Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second session of the Optimizing Cash webinar series. If you were unable to join me last week, we talked about the visibility and metrics that every ASC leader needs because you can't fix what you can't see. Before we get started, I do just want to say thank you sincerely for being here. And in some cases, thank you for watching the recording. I know everyone joining today has a full schedule and countless competing priorities. The fact that you chose to spend this time investing in your center and your leadership means a great deal to me. I see you. I see the challenges that you're navigating every day. And I hope today's session reminds you that your work truly does matter. As I shared last week, the inspiration for this webinar series came after the ASCA conference a few months ago. Following my presentation, I had the privilege of meeting so many ASC leaders afterwards. We talked about their centers and their challenges and the opportunities they were seeing. And so many wanted to connect with me following the conference, so we set up strategy sessions. During these sessions, what struck me most was how these very simple conversations led to new ideas. They led to greater clarity, right? Actionable steps. And so those discussions reminded me why I love this industry and why I enjoy sharing what we've learned over the years. If we can help even one leader see their revenue cycle a little bit differently, then we've made a meaningful impact. That's why I wanted to continue those conversations through this webinar series. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Alisha Rabel. I am the proud founder and CEO of AT&C Revenue Services. These 3 weeks, we're talking about something that affects every ASC, regardless of your size or your specialty mix or your location. And that is revenue cycle. Revenue cycle is really about creating predictable cash flow so your physicians can continue caring for patients. Your staff, they have the resources that they need, right? And then your surgery center can continue growing. Today's session is going to be all about understanding where cash actually breaks. So before we can talk about where cash breaks, we first have to understand something fundamental. Revenue cycle isn't just a collection of tasks. It's one connected system. Okay. And once you begin looking at it that way, you actually start seeing why small issues upstream create much bigger financial problems downstream. So one of the biggest misconceptions I see in healthcare is that we think of revenue cycle as a collection of individual departments, silos. Registration does their job. Insurance verification does theirs. Coding hands it off. Billing submits that claim, right? Payment posting posts the money. Collections begin the follow-up process. But that's not actually how revenue cycle works. See, revenue cycle is a system. And in every system, the output is only as good as the weakest point. So notice in this funnel, at every stage, the opportunity gets a little smaller. Every time a case moves to the next step, there's another chance for revenue to be delayed or reduced or just completely lost. So if every revenue cycle truly is one connected system, the next logical question then becomes, where does this system actually break? Because cash rarely disappears all at once. It leaks, usually through a series of small process breakdowns that compound over time. So let's walk through those together. Before we do, I do want to say this. Systems don't fail all at once, okay? They fail one process at a time, and then just eventually leadership feels it, right, in cash flow. So I really want to take my time for a second on this slide because it's really important. Starting with the front end. This is where revenue cycle really begins. Scheduling, insurance verification, authorization accuracy. And honestly, if the front end is weak, the rest of the revenue cycle spends months trying to recover from it. So to give you an example, maybe insurance wasn't verified correctly. Maybe the authorization only covered one CPT code instead of the full procedure that was performed. Maybe the date range was too narrow and the date of service changed. Now the patient is treated, the claim gets denied, billing has to rework it, collections are delayed. And then leadership is wondering why cash slowed down 45 days later, right? That issue didn't start in billing, it started up front. One takeaway I always encourage, slow down enough to get the front end right the first time, because prevention is significantly cheaper than any type of rework. Okay. Then we move into the mid-cycle, coding accuracy, charge capture completeness, timeliness, right? This is where a lot of silent revenue leakage happens. Maybe charges were missed. Maybe modifiers weren't applied correctly. Maybe documentation supports a different level of reimbursement, but nobody caught it. And sometimes these issues don't even create denials, which makes them harder to identify because the claim still gets paid, but just underpaid. One of the best things is that you can do as a center leader is to create regular auditing and communication loops between coding, the clinical staff, right? Your billing teams. And so not really to place blame on any one area, but to identify patterns early before they become expensive habits. So then we get to the back end, claim submission, denial management, AR follow-up, payment posting, right? And I always say payment posting is one of those most overlooked operational visibility tools in the entire revenue cycle, because payment posting actually tells you the reality. It tells you what's actually getting paid, what's getting denied, what's underpaying, what trends are repeating. If denial management and follow-up aren't structured, centers end up trapped in constant rework cycles instead of proactive resolution. So one of the biggest takeaways here, don't just measure activity, measure outcomes. Not just how many accounts were touched, but whether cash is actually moving. Okay, because at the end of the day, breakdowns anywhere in this system eventually show up as delayed cash flow or lost revenue, or increased write-offs, right? Maybe some operational stress. So again, revenue cycle is not isolated departments. They're not silos. It's one connected system. So one of the most visible symptoms of those breakdowns is denials. But I want to challenge you to think about denials just a little bit differently. Denials aren't usually the problem. They're evidence that something upstream didn't happen the way that it should have. So instead of simply asking, how do we fix this denial? Let's talk about preventing the next one. One of the biggest mindset shifts that you can make at a center is moving from reactive denial management to proactive denial prevention. Because the goal is not just resolving claims, it's reducing how often they happen in the first place. And that starts with root cause analysis. Not just asking, how do we fix this claim, but asking, why did this happen at all? Was it an authorization issue? Was it eligibility? Was it coding, documentation? Communication breakdown is very common across the board. Because if we only treat the symptom, the denial just keeps repeating itself. And that's where a lot of centers get stuck, working the same denials over and over and over without fixing the process upstream. The strongest teams categorize denials. They assign ownership. They track trends over time and then build those prevention strategies around the patterns that they're seeing. Because when you solve the root cause, you don't just recover cash, you prevent future revenue leakage. And so one thing I want to share that I've learned over the years is we should never build cultures where people are afraid of mistakes, right? We build cultures where people feel safe identifying those root causes, because fixing a process is far more valuable than assigning blame. So when people feel seen, they're much more willing to help solve the problem at the root. So once you've reduced recurring denials, the next opportunity is making sure your team is spending time where it creates the greatest impact financially. Okay, because here's the reality. Not every account deserves the same amount of attention. Prioritization matters. So one of the biggest mistakes I see across the board in AR management is treating every account the same. Not all accounts require the same strategy or the same urgency or even the same workflow. Okay, high dollar accounts should usually be prioritized differently with weekly touches. Certain payers require very specific follow-up approaches. And aging buckets should be managed strategically, not just worked randomly. Consistency is also critical in the process. Strong AR teams have defined follow-up cadences so accounts don't sit untouched for long periods of time. We call these at AT&C no account left behind. And something I believe is extremely important operationally. Leaders should have visibility into what collectors are actually working every single day. And I don't mean manually reviewing, going account by account by account, one by one. I mean having tools, having dashboards or workflow visibility that allows you to quickly see what's been worked, what's not been worked, where accounts are stalling out, and whether activity is actually moving cash, because visibility creates accountability. And accountability helps ensure the team is focused on the work that drives the greatest financial impact. Everything that we've talked about so far, right? We've talked about prevention. We've talked about prioritization. We've talked about follow-up. None of it happens consistently without structure, because great revenue cycle performance isn't built on heroic efforts from just one team. It's built on repeatable systems. Okay, reliable cash flow usually starts with reliable operations, not constant firefighting, not depending on just one rock star employee to save the day, and not scrambling every month to figure out where cash slowed down. It comes from structure. It comes from clear workflows, clear ownership, consistent reporting, and accountability across the center in RCM teams. Because when processes feel inconsistent, cash flow usually does too. Now, when teams understand their role, consistency, that follow-up is happening, and leaders have visibility into that performance, operations become far more stable. Now, stable operations creates financial predictability, and that's why strong systems matter so much. They help reduce the chaos, right? They help reduce that variability, and they create an environment where performance can happen consistently, even when the industry itself feels unpredictable, as we talked about in the previous session last week. Now, let's bring all of this together. Everything that we've discussed sounds great, right, in theory, but what does it actually look like inside a surgery center? Here's a situation we encounter more often than you might think. So I wanted to share a real world example with you today. This is a real world example of what we often walk into when evaluating revenue cycle performance. And what's important is that from the outside looking in, the center may actually appear healthy. Hey, the surgery center has strong case volume, physicians are busy, the schedule looks full, cases are happening. But then leadership starts asking, if volume is strong, why doesn't cash feel stable? And that's usually where we begin digging deeper. One of the first things we often see is inconsistent collections despite strong case volume. That's a major indicator that there are operational breakdowns in this system that are happening somewhere in the revenue cycle. Because if cases are happening consistently, but collections are unstable, cash is leaking somewhere in the process. Then we start looking at AR aging. And a common pattern that we see is AR over 90 days continuing to grow month after month, sometimes over that 20% of total AR. And that's usually a sign that the center is becoming reactive instead of proactive. Accounts are aging faster than they're being resolved, And what often happens is teams become so overwhelmed with workload that they focus only on touching accounts instead of truly resolving those accounts to increase that cash. Okay, which leads directly into the next issue, denials. Okay, denials being worked multiple times with little actual resolution. You'll see the same account reopened again and again and again. Maybe documentation was resent. Maybe an appeal was submitted. Maybe a note was added, but the denial root cause was never truly addressed. Okay, that creates massive inefficiency. And then one of the biggest operational gaps we see is that there is no clear accountability across workflows. Who owns the denial? Who owns follow-up? Who owns fixing the root cause that is identified? Who owns escalation? Because when ownership is unclear, accounts stall out. Communication breaks down, and guess what? Cash flow starts to slow down as well. And this is really the key takeaway from this slide, that many centers are earning the revenue. They're just not fully realizing the cash, right? And there's a big difference between generating revenue and actually converting it into predictable, healthy cash flow. So throughout today's session, we've talked about processes. Again, we looked at workflows, denials, bottlenecks, and cash flow. But if we stop there, we've actually missed the most important part of the revenue cycle, people, right? People. Revenue cycle is about people. Every claim we submit represents a patient who trusted your surgery center. Every payment collected helps your physicians continue caring for the next patient, right? It keeps your doors open. It supports your staff. It allows your surgery center to invest back into patient care. And something I've been incredibly passionate about over the years is remembering the people behind the work, the insurance verification specialist, the coder, the biller, the collector, the payment poster, the administrator, right? Trying to hold this all together. They don't come to work hoping to create problems. They come to work wanting to make a difference. And as leaders, our responsibility isn't simply to measure performance. It's to create an environment where people can succeed. That means building better systems, creating clarity, removing those roadblocks, coaching instead of blaming, asking questions instead of making assumptions. Because here's something I've learned. People who feel seen perform differently. That's why I end every conversation the same way. I see you, you matter, right? And if you're leading a team, I really hope that you'll remind them of that as a challenge to do that this week. Remind them that you see them and they matter. So let's finish today by talking about what leadership looks like in action. Okay, here are a few practical things that you can begin doing as soon as you get back to your desk today. I don't like leaving without some takeaways. So I want you to leave with one thing in each category to do, not 10 different things to do. So this week, the first one very simple thing to do, review your biggest revenue leakage opportunities. Look beyond collections and evaluate just one of the following. Maybe front-end accuracy. Look at your registration, your verification, authorizations. Maybe look at your top denial categories. AR over 90 days. High dollar accounts awaiting follow-up. Maybe underpayments, right? So review your biggest revenue leakage opportunity and look beyond collections and evaluate only one item from that list. All right. And then over the course of the next month, assign ownership, not responsibility, ownership, right? Every major workflow should have someone who owns monitoring performance, identifying bottlenecks, resolving root causes, and communicating those trends. One of the biggest gaps I see isn't that people don't care. right? It's that everyone assumes someone else owns that process. Ownership creates accountability. It's accountability that creates the improvement. So the challenge for you is assign ownership or accountability to just one of those workflows listed. And then over the next quarter, don't try to fix everything. Just pick one recurring workflow that causes these repeated issues. Maybe it's authorization, maybe it's coding, denial prevention, maybe it's AR follow-up, right? Build a better process around that one area, because when you improve the process, you're preventing hundreds of future problems, not just solving today's. Okay. So if today's discussion raised more questions than answers, that's actually a good thing, because every surgery center is different. Every payer mix is different. Every workflow is different, right? Which is exactly why I personally would love the opportunity to just continue the conversation with you personally. So one of my favorite parts of what I do isn't presenting. It's the conversations that come afterward. Sitting down with leaders, actually hearing their stories, learning about their centers, helping connect a few dots, because every center has a story, right? Every leader carries challenges that aren't always visible, and every one of them deserves someone willing to listen. And I'm giving you my time. Okay, that's exactly why I'm offering these strategy sessions. I'm offering back my time. So there's no fee to you, nothing to get approved from anyone. Just simply set up a call and we could talk one-on-one just to better understand your specific center. Okay, and we can develop some easy changes that you can begin to implement immediately to help your center's cash flow. So this is honestly my way of giving back to an industry that has just given me so much over my career. And during the 30 minutes that we'll be together, we're not going to just try to solve every revenue cycle challenge that your center has. We're going to look at where you are today. We'll talk through your biggest challenges. We'll identify where cash might be getting stuck, one of those bottlenecks, right? The front end, the mid-cycle, the back end. And then together, we'll break it down into manageable pieces. Sometimes all it takes is another set of eyes and someone to help connect those dots. So someone to ask a few questions that maybe you haven't even thought to ask. So we'll develop a roadmap together to help you gain that visibility that you might need so that you can make better decisions with stronger confidence. So if that sounds helpful to you, there is a QR code there. Just scan that QR code, reserve a time that works best for you, bring your AR report or your biggest frustration, or just show up with your questions. And again, there's no obligation at all for that. Honestly, it's just an opportunity to have a further conversation and hopefully provide some insight that helps move your center forward. So next week, we're going to build on the last session. We're going to move from understanding where cash actually breaks to talking about the people behind the performance, right? Building accountability, ownership, and predictable results. So I hope you can find the time to join me. Please spread this to your colleagues. I would love to help as many centers as I possibly can. So until then, thank you for spending your time with me. And as always, I love to end with I see you, you matter. And I can't wait to be part of your journey.